Welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. Our heart is to help you clarify vision, improve decision-making, and stimulate growth in your church, no matter the size, denomination, or context. We're passionate about seeing disciplined conversations and disciplined decisions create a sustainable, lasting impact in the community that you serve. I'm your host, Jesse Anderson, and I'm joined by Intentional Churches co-founders Doug Parks and Bart Rendell. Their book, Intentional Churches, How Implementing an Operating System Clarifies Vision, Improves Decision-Making, and Stimulates Growth, is available now anywhere you get your books. And the purpose of this podcast is to summarize the key thoughts and ideas of this biblically based system that we call ChurchOS. In today's episode, we're going to explain more clearly how this idea of an operating system for your church is a game changer for seeing sustainable results, and how ChurchOS isn't just another strategic planning process, but one that is rooted in and built on the biblical principles of the Great Commission. So, Doug, we talked in episode 1 about the proverbial carrot hanging in front of many church leaders, that is the coveted silver bullet strategy or idea. Let's briefly recap why that's so enticing, but also why it won't lead to the long-term results that we truly want.
Yeah, Jesse, I think it's not just us as church leaders that are susceptible to the silver bullet thinking. There's a kind of a renaissance going on right now. If you're paying attention at all, a new app came out, new system called Noom. And it's really about how you approach your health and your weight. And for years and years, I don't know if you're like our family, we followed many of the fads of the dieting world that were out there, all the way back to Atkins and some of these other cabbage diets and various things. And so we got kind of tricked into this thinking of restrictive dieting. And Noom is trying to reinvent our thought process around it and making it a lifestyle, back to fundamental way we think about food and life and various things. And so that's a quick example of one of the things in our world that is quickly evolving. So in church, a great example of the silver bullet kind of thinking, we see it a ton when we're out there on the road and with church leaders where they, Chris Hodges and Church of the Highlands have been a very influential church over the last decade and done great things. And they have what's called Growth Track. Many are familiar with it. And we'll see where a church has brought Growth Track in as a silver bullet solution, and it doesn't work. We see many churches where it works because it's fundamental. It's very similar to purpose-driven church and simple church and some various other innovations over the last run of church leadership. But the difficulty is, the reason why it works, Growth Track works at Church of the Highlands, is because Chris Hodges eats, breathes, and sleeps it. I mean, like, he owns it wholeheartedly. It's his. And so he's convinced of it. He's a strategist at heart, and he's able to convert it for his people in a way that fundamentally they know Growth Track is going to be good for them. So the tendency in all of us as church leaders is to think, because it's working for Chris Hodges, then why wouldn't it work for us?
Yeah.
And our learning over this last decade of working with churches has been, what's wrong is not the silver bullet, the methodology, the program. What's wrong is the thinking underneath. We don't fundamentally understand that. Our team isn't aligned to it. And so we might get a pop out of Growth Track for a little while, but you give it a year or two and it's not working as well. And so then we're on the hunt for the next thing, all the while not addressing the real issue, which is the underlying thinking of Great Commission accomplishment.
Really the disciplines. I mean, to go back to the diet thing, you do one, you see short-term results, right? Anybody can spike and improve and go, hey, I dropped weight. I got, I got those P90X abs, whatever it is you want, you can get that. But where is the after version years later? That takes discipline, right? And that's what I think Noom is finding, is there's a psychology behind lifestyle change and behavior that really gets into. I think it's so interesting with Hodges too, that I think a lot of people, it's just a great example. A lot of people will go and they'll pick the strategy, they'll miss the conviction. Mm-hmm. That's what I hear you saying too, is that it's not the thing. It's the conviction underneath it. It's the thinking behind it that really leads to that. Bart, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do a lot, but I don't have time for all of them. But I'll give you one simple thought. Growth Track, because we've worked with a lot of churches implementing it, actually fits. So this is what we're saying in episode 1. How do you think about the strategy so that you understand why it works or doesn't work, right? So it actually fits a spot in our base model we represent in the Great Commission engine called the engagement pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the least tended, it would make the top 3 tended arenas of strategy is, how do I take someone that doesn't know anything about us or Jesus, connect them to us, Jesus, and one another or others? If we can do that, we can go on a lifelong journey. If you look at Growth Track, what it's attempting to do through a cyclical kind of pattern is give you a way to engage. And then if you look at our engagement pathway in the book and the simple, we're going to go more into this later, I think. When you look at the principles behind it, it honors a lot of those principles. But yet it's a strategy in and of itself. And so it works because of the principles underneath of it. And if it stopped working for you in your church, then it's probably because one of the principles is kind of being violated in some form or fashion. And this, interestingly, we talk about the locality of the local church and the regional effect of the spiritual, physical coming together in what we call your relational reach zone. Reach zones are different. So for instance, how you run Growth Track might need to be different in the Southeast than it is in the Northeast, where the culture is distinctly different, or in the Northwest. And you're still trying to reach the lost and grow them up and connect them like I described. So having the principles in mind and becoming disciplined about those fundamentals allows you to then study the effectiveness of a strategy and not see it just as the next latest, greatest, silver bullet. And every church needs an engagement pathway, period, forever. It needs a simple step engagement pathway to connect people. And so I just want to say the elimination of the silver bullet mentality starts with understanding why something works in the fundamentals.
Yeah, can I add one thing, Jesse?
Please go for it.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
It's your podcast.
You're generous, man. You're generous. So, one of the other things with the silver bullet idea that I do want to hit on, and if you're younger, you may not track quite as much with it, but if you got a few years of church ministry, we've gone through these eras in church leadership where really the boomer church, ironically, who are in the same position that the builders were when they changed their church now, as millennials change the shape of what the church looks like, that they created this very much seeker-sensitive, seeker attractional model. And at some point, attractional got vilified almost, where evangelism was not like this, it's like a dirty word. And so then my generation, Gen X...
I don't think attractional is even a word, by the way, but go ahead.
Okay. So then my generation, Gen X, comes along, and we're all like, we were interns in these churches, and we have scars and wounds, and like it was so corporate, and so we go down this path of like the house church movement. I was a part of one of those here in Vegas, and part of the church plant we started. And we teach about how bad the attractional is. And then you guys come along, and you've been great, this idea of missional approach. And we become apathetic. We need to get back out into our communities and like rubbing shoulders and serving people and bringing good, impact into our communities has been great. And so even those have divulged over this run into kind of the silver bullet thinking. And so I'm all for the disciple-making movement, disciples who make disciples argument. It's just we have to understand that when a church then grows and organizes, even at 100 or 200 or a mega church, whatever it may be, the complexity grows, and we start to drift away from the individual relational focus that the gospel truly is. It's person to person. It's not institution to person. And so the silver bullet thing just gets us chewed up in these, we need to be a missional community now, and this model. Well, it's just a way to deliver this relational gospel that we've been handed. And so I want to, it's more than just programmatic silver bullet thinking. It can also get into silver bullet philosophy or thinking. Does that make sense?
It's really good. Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is the next episode when we talk about Great Commission Engine, without saying that we believe in everything, like what you just mentioned, those 3 models, we believe those make up the core of the Great Commission Engine. But you can't over-focus on one. I think that's generationally.
Balance.
That's what we do, right?
Balance.
Each generation flip-flops and goes, no, we're not doing what our parents did
and that's the reason.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
It's just as a reaction, yeah.
Yeah.
I got to say one more thing.
Go for it.
I know we're trying to move along. just about the context we're in. And, in my life, I feel like I've tried to, the Bible says test every thought, right? So I would frustrate my folks because I literally would read an atheist book so I could understand where the atheist was coming from. They think I'm indoctrinating myself, I'm just trying to understand the fundamentals so that I can test every thought. Well, as church leaders, we have to do this too. So I'm reading, I just see stuff out there now, not from very good, great-hearted leaders and probably really good ideas in some ways. And what's happening right now is the church is about to en masse innovate some way, somehow. And it's done this before, when technology entered. And I've seen a lot of these phases. My dad, he talks about when video projectors, he's still preaching today, but and he's an evangelist and a positive guy and reads all the latest. But he calls when we moved from singing out of the hymn book to singing from projectors, when we started singing off the wall. So he said, I can remember when we started singing off the wall. And we moved the drums on stage. So we've been through these innovations, and some are still in different stages of these. So now you'll read a blog that says, well, small is the new big, right? So we need to build our sanctuary smaller. Or it almost becomes like the rule or idea that's going to bring victory, when it's really a set of fundamentals.
That's good.
So I can tell you what I think about small is the new big in context of our filters, and tell you I don't know if that is definitely true for every single context. And what they're talking about is maybe the catalytic weekend experience expression in that context. And I'm going, well, we're trying to reach a lot of young millennial families, and they go to concerts that have tens of thousands of people.
I know.
And I go with them, and I'm stoked about it. So I don't think small isn't a strategy, right?
That's good.
Can't be, but it might be an idea you want to consider for your context.
Yeah.
But
wow.
Anyway.
Tremendous insight there. I do want to move us along, but there's a lot of great stuff there. Man, we could do a whole other couple of podcasts just on what we talked about, just drilling down deeper.
Yep.
So this idea of an operating system is not necessarily a familiar concept when we're talking about church. And I don't even know, maybe there's people who have sort of an aversion to that idea. But Bart, would you just explain what is an operating system at its core? And why did you guys decide to build ChurchOS? And what's kind of behind that language?
Yeah. So way early on, like over a decade ago, when we were learning the fundamentals of great team-based planning and kind of a new Socratic methodology, starting with discovery, putting the tension of vision in play, and translating it to the church, one of our early mentors, at least I was in a meeting, said, what we're teaching you can be an operating system for your whole organization, right? And I never, ever forgot that moment. And I didn't know what it meant exactly, except that now I think I can describe it as a base set of routines. And I'm going to use an analogy of a computer. It runs on code that runs all the time, whether you can see it or not, that when you put software on top of it for the sake of productivity, operates well. And I think a church can go back to biblical fundamentals and develop the same quote unquote routines and make them quote unquote code that they run on. And so in our case, we have a 4-step process that we call intentional growth planning, which is a 4-phase cycle that just runs constantly at the highest level and can run all the way down to a meeting or a department or a campus and become the operating system on which the church is running. And it contains tools or constructs that make it run. So it gets the team into conversation in a rhythm or routine fashion that creates all kinds of productivity then. So that's kind of what the idea means, that it runs on a core processor of intentional growth planning for us, of 4 phases of discover, design, organize, and activate. And we go deeper into, and I'm sure we will throughout the podcast, of how you operate in those 4 phases and what they mean to you. And they're so easy to understand and execute, but it takes a minute and some patience to stop and go, okay, I want to put an operating system in my church so that it's running like this even after I leave, So is that kind of
that's
a quick overview?
It's interesting just even to think about. I don't want my iPhone operating in a different way each week. I want to just know this is what this
Turn
button
it on,
does.
it works.
This is what this app does. Obviously, there are updates, right? But there are fundamentals that don't change. I've got a home screen, a lock screen, a notification center, a no control center, all of that kind of stuff. That seems to make sense. I don't want it changing every week and them just going, hey, we're just playing around with kind of the best way to help you interact with your phone. It's confusing and it's not leading to any sort of sustainable usage in that case.
Right. And so we've built intentional growth planning in our what we call the living toolbox. We named it that because we think it will be added to and it will evolve. Now, the Great Commission engine, core code of our OS, strategic conversation every team's got to have often.
Yeah.
It'll always be there. But we, as a user group now, are learning from our very base of churches that are using this, how to iterate it and distribute that back out, just like your iPhone. I don't know if you auto update or not, but you know, like I'm an auto update guy now. I wasn't. I was like, I don't know. I just had some idea that somehow they were going to get into my house, hijack my phone. But we have that mentality about our OS that we would improve even over time how to run our churches, but yet the base constructs would be fundamentally the same.
The iPhone 12 is soon to come out. We know that it's not going to be too crazy different than iPhone 12. We know that, oh gosh, I've forgotten. It's iOS 14. I had a momentary blip there. iOS 14 is going to come out, but it's going to work in the same way. Things get updated. So that makes sense.
I don't know, the analogy kind of stops because I do think about the fact that eventually you're trying to upgrade and your machine won't support the upgrade anymore.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that any church can always be upgrading our system.
Well, that's the great thing, I think, with going back to to biblical scriptural fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
This is not our ideas. This is not 2020 ideas. This is from Jesus 2,000 years ago.
When digital church, as it is, becomes a normative strategy, as was over the eons, I can give you examples of strategies that have come and gone. We need the operating system to evolve with that, right? But it's always got to be based on that same base code or set of conversations that are running. But boy, we better be ready to understand how digital church can still be church in a biblical Acts 2 way, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I literally have heard guys saying right now, it can't. Well, I'm not saying it can or can't yet. I'm saying it must because it's a new day.
Yeah.
But the church has still got to be the church.
Well, I'm sure there were church leaders when the printing press was invented as well who were saying the gospel cannot transition through the
it's got to be print. It's got to be shared
right.
Through
it's got to be oral tradition.
Yeah,
oral
tradition
ingrained. That's kind of the moment we're in right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one thing here because here's a real life story of how, number one, your church is running an operating system right now that probably has never been codified. Everybody has to learn as they're coming in.
It's oral tradition.
It's oral tradition.
Oh my gosh.
It's pre-printing press.
Now you're preaching.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and here's one of my examples. Some churches will interact with, they run the consensus model of operating system, and they confuse consensus with unity. And, let me be crystal clear, and I'm not sorry if you're running the consensus model. You need to change. Consensus is the pathway to mediocrity. And you have replaced consensus with unity and misplaced definition. And so what ChurchOS does, this is a misunderstanding over language and terminology, which when we started this work, we didn't understand that. But again and again and again, we've seen churches, they're stumbling more over terminologies or even like in ChurchOS, we build thinking about, not exclusively for ever. It's not an either or, but we build from the frame point of trying to reach our friends and neighbors with the same life change and good we've experienced in our life. We've literally had churches where an elder board has to go study for a month or two to decide whether or not their church is going to be that kind of church that prioritizes people far from God, or if they believe simply that by feeding the 99 and again, that somehow
you're going to get back to that.
You're going to get back to that.
Yeah.
And so this is how an OS, these things that are misaligned in your church that you don't even know because your current OS, undeclared, is running. These are real things in real churches everywhere.
That's really good. One of the things I love that you guys talk about in the book is core beliefs of ChurchOS. Simple is better, less is more, and we sometimes make church too hard. love that.
Yeah, let me just say that was a confession.
It was a public confession.
It's a public confession.
Yeah.
I if my wife listened to this right now, she would, Sometimes I overcomplicate things, right?
Yeah,
in life in general.
She's probably waving her hanky.
She would wave her hanky at that.
That's great.
And I just think, anyway, that was just to say, yeah, I've tried to make, I myself have made church too hard.
I think we all have, right? It just is what it is. What did Peter Drucker say? I forget the specific quote, but every organization is constantly drifting towards complexity.
Yeah.
It is the lazy river of an organization.
Yeah.
We're moving in a direction. All right. You guys made it really clear in the book what it looks like when a church is running ChurchOS effectively. And you share 21 benchmarks of a healthy church. And I want to read them. And I hope that for the pastors and church leaders that are listening, that they hear this kind of with that hope. It's like, hopefully this lights up and you going, that's what I'm trying to do. But these are the 21 benchmarks that you guys feel like, okay, when we get to running ChurchOS effectively, here's what's true. Mission is the Great Commission. Nothing more, nothing less. Vision for double impact is stated and clear in timing and scope. Evaluation standards are clear and objective. Truth is spoken in the name of the mission to the last 10%. Man, that's a huge one. Biblical fundamentals of the Great Commission execution are known. Priorities are set and reviewed often. There are no sacred cows. Evangelistic growth is central to vision and planning. Connecting the lost to the church, Christ, and others is effective. Leadership dashboards are defined and reviewed regularly. All the executive pastors are happy about that. Yeah, they want that. Strategic activity is blended well with day-to-day activity. That's a powerhouse. Structure and roles are defined for today and the future. Meetings are efficient and effective. Somebody say amen. Common language is defined and used. That one we could just park on all day. Like, that's a huge one. Routine planning is common to everyone. Champions for planning and accountability are established. Silver bullet and quick fix thinking are closely monitored. And maybe I would add, based on what we've talked about, filtered through all of this. Governance and decision-making are growth-oriented, not personality-driven in that way. I'm adding that, but based on what you were just talking about, Doug. Generosity and giving always have an active plan. Leadership development always has an active plan. Prayer always has an active plan. And church multiplication is a conviction.
Yeah, man.
That sounds like a church I want to be a part of.
Dude, imagine if we had 1,000 of those right there. That'd be...
Wow.
Oh, and then they're
Game
collaborating
changer.
together?
Oh, wow.
Woo.
Anything you guys would drill down on in that? That's a mouthful. I'm sure a couple of them spoke to people who are listening, if not all, but I just mean a couple specific. Any of those that you just want to grab onto and just say, these, whether they're near and dear to your heart, whether you're thinking a specific thought about them.
Yeah, well, let me first say, you hear an outcome list like that, and I think I would want my church I was leading and the one I was in. I led in a couple, or was a part of a team in a couple of great churches. I don't know if I was ever in one, or there is one that's perfect in all those arenas, but at least you can know what one looks like. My wife right now, she's working out a bunch, and she's got, and I work out with her, but she's way stronger and better than I am. But anyway, she has this list of...
She's a triathlete, man. She's an Ironman.
She has a list of these benchmarks for kind of like where you would be if you're kind of like healthy and strong, right? And she's literally categorically working through all of them. And she's shared them with me. And I can say, and I want to say to anyone listening, that it could be a little discouraging, like it has been for me. Like, dude, I can't even remotely get close to that one yet. But I have found a couple that I'm pretty close on, right? Or getting close to. And first thing I just want to say is don't let it discourage you. I mean, let it be vision casting. That's good. And the next thing we got to do is figure out what, as we teach, is what in there can I work on in the next season, right?
That's good.
So that's one thing I would say about it, is don't let it discourage you at all.
Yeah, I'm going to drill into a very non-sexy one on that list, and it's the idea of meetings. I mean, I was guilty as an executive pastor again and again in our organization. I had a business leader that challenged me. He was like, how could you cut 20% out of your meetings? Like, literal time out of your meetings. I'm like, you can't do that, man. We have to be together for 2 hours or 3 hours to do this planning or whatever. But what I found was, and this principle is baked into ChurchOS, like it was there. Just putting the tension and the goal on the conversation. How do I reduce my meetings by 20% or my time in meetings by 20% for the whole of the staff? I'm actually getting back resource then to apply toward mission and vision. And we have a tool inside of ChurchOS that helps with this. Like when you templatize the way a meeting should be run, and we're crystal clear on it, and every meeting then in the organization is run that way, you can get literal 10, 20, 30% time back in to really focus on our strategies along the way. And so, that's not... Running great meetings is probably not the most sexy one on there, but man, it's a real thing.
Oh gosh, it yields. If the ones you could miss if you're not careful, that would be maybe one of the most powerful. One for me,
and one of the most painful, especially
and one of the most painful,
especially for the people who aren't the leaders. Yeah,
right.
I was just going to say that one of the big surprises and why we put it in the list is, and I think I was told this years ago and just kind of missed it, is the benefit of common language to align a team.
Yeah.
And literally when we're to the level that when you're onboarding people into your team, whether it's lay people or staff people or whatever, giving them what we mean by these and giving them that common language. Because usually in most organizations, there is some level of common language. And by tribe, it varies. It depends if you're an independent charismatic, an ARC church, or you're a Southern Baptist or whatever. They'll have their language. And even by church, it might be a little different based on the background of the leader.
Right.
But it's more caught than taught.
Yep.
And so I just have become a huge fan. And part of what we're trying to do is, and somebody asked me recently, do I have to call in the Great Commission Engine Piston 1 the Catalytic Weekend Experience? I'm like, no. You can label it differently, but label it consistently and understand as a team what it really means. Because what the definition is and what we mean by is super important in team alignment and productivity. So
that's really good.
Yep.
Well, we could continue to drill down. I want to say this to those of you who are either watching or listening. The Intentional Churches book goes into much, much greater detail on all the facets of ChurchOS. It's loaded with insights and stories that you can relate to. And I'll say this from my perspective, because I know Doug and Bart won't toot their own horn, but I think it's pretty impressive to have the foreword written by Gene Apple from Eastside Christian Center, which is one of the fastest growing churches in America that's running ChurchOS, and also to have a personal endorsement from Dave Ramsey. So those two are great kind of promoters of the book. But I'm just going to tell you, I'd highly recommend you to check the book out. We're doing our best to kind of cover the core principles, but we're moving fast on some of these. In the next episode, we're going to unpack the core idea of ChurchOS, and that is what we call the Great Commission Engine. This is built on Matthew 28, Acts 2, Luke 15, and it's not exclusive to one type of church. These are foundational principles for all churches that are striving towards everything that Jesus told us to do. And so we've spent 2 episodes laying the groundwork for ChurchOS, but don't stop here. The next episode is so crucial to understanding this operating system, so I hope you'll continue to listen or watch. As always, for free practical resources to help you where you're at today or to learn more about what we offer and how we can partner with your church, visit intentionalchurches.com. You can also follow us on your favorite social media platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay connected. And we are honored and humbled to serve you in any way we can to see greater kingdom impact in your church. Thanks for joining us today.